Hello everyone, this is Mirzai from Cal Poly Pomona, and in this lesson we're going to go over forecasting with seasonality and trend in R. So the data set that we're going to look at today is the dataset smartphone from your textbook. In this data set, you're able to identify seasonality and trend at the same time. So let's take a look at the data set and make sure that we brought it to the platform correctly. So the first two lines just shows that I set my work directory, and I have already saved this data set as a CSV file under my folder download, and I'm reading it using read.csv. When I look at this data set, you can see that year, quarter, and its thousands of cells are brought to the platform. However, the name of the third column might not be quite appropriate. So I'm going to go ahead and change the name of that variable in my data set using function names. And I'm going to change the third column name. All right, I'm going to go ahead and rerun and look at the header again. So I have the cells. Now what I want to do is to look at the time series plot of cells. The function for that is TS. So I'm going to make a variable called cells and put the third column of data into TS. So by running this function, cells turns into a time series object. As you see, it starts from 1 and it ends at 16, time period 16, and the frequency is 1. You can also see that as structure using the str of your cells, and if you execute it, you see that the structure of cells is time series. Now I can plot that. I'm going to go ahead and plot my variable cells that I created as a time series, and as you can see, we can see a very clear seasonality pattern, and also we see a trend because the cells is increasing over time. If we saw a decreasing trend, we also included a trend variable. So when we have both seasonality and trend, we should include both in our data set. When you look at the data set up here, you don't see any variable trend in here, because if we had a variable trend, it would start from 1 and goes all the way to 16. So our job is to create that trend variable in our data set. Another thing is, because we have seasonality, we have to make sure quarter here it's a categorical variable, because we know that for seasonality we have to include quarter as factors or categorical variables to our model. So we have to do two things. So in my plot, before I move on, I want to extend the limits of x. So I'm going to put xlim, that stands for the limits of x, from 0 to, let's say we want to go a few years ahead, so I would put to 25. And also I'm going to add a title for my plot and that says time series of cells, for example. And that way we both include a higher range for my x and also include the title. The reason I want to include a higher range here, because I want to show some prediction down into the future. We might also go ahead and increase the limit of y, because in this case our cells are increasing, and if we want to show the projection in the future, it might not fit within the existing range of y. So I'm going to put ylim is equal to, right now it goes to 8, let's at least add 5 units to it. So I'm going to put ylim from 0 to 13. And don't forget the C, and execute that one more time. Now you see our range in y has increased, and our plot looks a little bit smaller because we increased the y limit. So xlim and ylim is for the limits of x and y axis, and main allows you to put a title for your chart. So now let's go ahead and apply the two changes that we wanted to apply to our data set to move on. First is we want to make sure that quarter is a categorical variable. So I'm going to make sure that happens. So in our data, variable quarter is going to be changed to a factor. The next thing we want to do is to make sure that there is a new variable added to our data set called trend variable. And this is going to be a sequence of numbers from 1 through 16, because we have 16 data set. If I look at my data frame here, you see that I added trend variable 1 through 16. If we execute this line and look at the str of data, we see now quarter is factor, right? So we have applied both changes into our data frame. Now we can go ahead and set up the regression model. I call the variable that includes the model as output, and the function is linear model. What we want to do to predict sales based on both trend and quarter variable in a data frame data. So if I execute that and look at the summary of my output, I see that everything has become significant. So in R, by default, the first quarter is dropped because for 4 categories, we only need 3 dummies. And in R, by default, the first category is the one that is dropped. If you look at all your p-values, they're significant at 0.05 level of significance or 95% level of confidence. So what would be our model in this case? The model would be your cells. It's going to be, I'm going to comment it out here. So cells is going to be equal to 4.7 plus 0.14 multiplied by trend or t variable minus 0.67 Q2 plus 1.058 Q3 plus 1.36 Q4. So basically, if you're in quarter 1, your prediction would be removing these parts. So you have 4.7 plus 0.14 multiplied by trend. Now, trend variable depends on what year you're making this prediction, what year and what quarter, right? So if I'm in the 10th year and second quarter, what is the value for trend variable? So if you're in second quarter of 10th year, it means that 9 years has passed and each of them is 4 quarter plus the 2 quarter in the 10th. So basically 4 multiplied by 9 is 36 plus 2 is 38. So you can also execute that and get the result here. So you have 38 is going to be the value for your trend variable. So trend variable here is calculated based on what year and period you are. If I'm in the first quarter of the 10th year, it's going to be 9 multiplied by 4 plus 1, which is 37. Now that I figured out the trend variable, that I replaced the 37, I'm in quarter 1, these variables are going to be all 0. If I'm in quarter 2, then these two are 0, and this takes a value of 1. If I'm in quarter 3, these two are going to be 0, and quarter 3 is going to be 1. And also same thing for quarter 4. This is going to be 1, and these are going to be 0. So that's how you use this model for prediction. Now, if I want to make some prediction, you can use the predict function, right? So you can put the predict function and put your output in here and save it in variable new and make that prediction. Now, if you look at new, it's going to be 16 because this is going to be 16 data point because it's going to make a prediction using your model for the 16 observation that you have given. So you can overlay that over the chart that you had using lines, right? So you can have lines, and then what you need to do, you put new here, and also you put a new color, for example, red, so you can make a distinction between the two. If I look at the plot, you see the overlay of these two functions. So the problem is, as you see, when we use the prediction over the variable output, it doesn't have any projection into the future past the data points that we have. So we have only 16 data points, and it just provides us the result up to 16. So what we want is the continuation of this forecast. So we had up to trend variable 16. So what we need is after that 17, 18, and all the way, let's say, to maybe period 32. And then for these, we also have to generate quarter, right? So we want to know that, for example, for period 17, we're in the first quarter, and in the 18, we are in the second quarter, and so forth. When we are in 32, we're going to be in the fourth quarter. So to generate this data set and give this new data set to make a prediction for this new data set and put it inside the prediction function, we have to write a few extra lines here. So my objective is to create a data set that shows the trend variable from 17 to 32 and the quarters, so that we can put it inside this prediction function and generate prediction that we can overlay and show down into the future. So to do that, first I create my trend variable that is going to be from 17 through 32. If I execute this line and look at the trend variable, you see that it goes from 17 to 32. If you look at the data, I'm going to run the data here that we had. You saw that in the data set, our trend variable goes down to 16. And at that point, we are in the quarter fourth. So at 17, we're in the quarter one. And then it starts counting these quarters and keep adding them to the data set. So my variable quarter is going to be a repetition of 1 through 4. How many times? 4 times, because from 17 to 32 we have 16 period, and if you divide it by 4, you're going to have 4 batch of 4 quarters. So basically what I can do is a replication of 1 through 4. How many times? 4 times. If I execute this line and look at quarter, you see that 1 through 4 has been repeated 4 times. Now we need to attach these two because this is the data frame that goes for our prediction. We need both quarter and trend to make a prediction using the output model that we have here. So I'm going to combine them. So I call it new data here. That is the cbind. Push this a little bit higher. That is going to be the cbind of your trend and quarter variables. So if I execute that and look at my new data, this is what we get. But remember that this should be a data frame. If I look at the structure of my new data, it's not a data frame. So to make it a data frame, you have to use the function as data frame. So new data, it's going to be as data frame. It's going to be equal to as data frame of new data. So I did that, and I look at my new data now. And if I look at the structure of my data, str of the new data, it should be data frame. Now it is a data frame, shows trend from 17 to 26 and quarter 1 through 4 for each of these trend variables. However, quarter is numeric. Remember that in this model that we created, quarter is a categorical variable. So I'm going to go ahead and do that change as well. So new data, column quarter, must be as factor of the same column. So basically we change them to categorical variable. If I look at the str of the data, as you see now, quarter has changed to a categorical variable, which is perfect. Another thing you have to make sure is that the names that you're using here, trend and quarter, is exactly the same name that you defined initially for establishing your model, because if you put something else here, it's not introduced to your initial model. This output model here knows trend and quarter. So if your names are different here, and let's say, for example, if your Q is lowercase, it's going to cause errors. So make sure that these names that you have in your new data set is exactly matching with the pre-existing variable names. Now I can give this new data set that is ready into my predict function and have the new prediction for this data set. So this time, as opposed to just looking at the data that we have, we're going to look at the new data and make a prediction for that. I would say new pred, standing for new prediction. And if I look at it, these are the new prediction that I have. So now I was able to make a prediction using a new data set, which is continuation of the data that we previously had. Now I'm going to attach it to the pre-existing predict that we had for period 1 through 16, and this is 17 through 32. Then I have prediction from period 1 through 32 and overlay it on this graph that I have here, because right now we just have up to period 16. That's the new data set that we overlaid here, but we want to combine new and new pred, because new pred gives us from 17 to 32. Even our range right now is to 25, but we can always extend this. So I'm going to go ahead and combine new and new pred and overlay it in this graph. So to do that, we have to just use C function. So we're going to combine new and new pred and call it new data input and run it. And if I look at this vector, you see that it has all the way 1 through 16, and then also another vector of 16 that are attached. We have to use lines now to overlay a graph on top of this. So the first part is going to be exactly the same. The second part is the one that is going to be added. And I put this new variable that I made here and execute this. As you see, is that the first part didn't change. So the new plot overlaid the pre-existing one, but however, this part is added. Now it's only going all the way to 25. If I make it going all the way to 32, what I have to do, I have to go back to my plot and increase the limitation of x to 32 or 33, rerun this plot, and when I do that, I lose this whole graph, and then run the last lines again to overlay the graph. So now we have it all the way to 32. So that way you can overlay your prediction over the actual for a longer period of time. Okay, with that, our lesson has concluded. Please refer to your Blackboard for your assignment. Thank you.